Welcome to video Shepcast number 2 and actual Shepcast. I lost track.
I think we're probably around 20.
It's got to be close to 20.
I think so.
It's got to be close to 20, and here we are on a Monday, very far apart from each other, as far apart from each other and still being technically on camera. It's a ways, though. It's a distance. And there are no police outside, but it's sure looking weird out there.
It's so hazy.
It's very hazy. I'm not sure if this is from fires elsewhere.
I'm
hope
assuming.
so.
I don't think it's around
Otherwise,
here.
the end of days.
It might be. I mean, feeling
yeah.
a lot like that too. So.
Every time there's wars and rumors of wars and famines and things of that nature, brings to mind the fact that all these things are eventually coming to an end. And every time it's nice and hazy out there, you say, well, it's either forest fires somewhere or it's the end of days. And this is one of the seals being broken. But who's to say?
Who's to say?
Who's to say? Welcome, obviously, to Amanda, who is my perpetual co-host here on the Shepcast. And we've got some readings.
We do.
For this upcoming Sunday. Amanda,
yes.
What are our readings that we have for this upcoming Sunday?
Well, I thank you for asking. I just had to go look it up.
Ah.
Isaiah chapter 55, verses 6 through 9. Philippians chapter 1, 12 through 14. And 19 through 30. I missed the second part and I was like, what a weird reading.
Yeah.
But there is a second part. And Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16.
Okay. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Indeed.
Yes. And for version check, Amanda, are you going to shock me?
Same old. Same old.
All right. For my version today, I have my second Bible that I ever owned. I thought it was my first. Yes, but I'm wrong. The very first Bible or part of a Bible that I owned was the one that was given to me at my baptism from my godparents, which is still in its presentation box. It doesn't get used. And that was just like a New Testament and Psalms, very nice leather-bound edition, gilded edges, that kind of thing. But this one has seen a little bit more activity.
Looks pretty worn.
Yeah, this is the Bible that I got. This is the one that I bought for myself back in the 1980s when I said to my mother one day, I said, I don't want to buy my own Bible. And she said, let's go to the store right now, which we did. And we went to the Canadian Bible Society store and I bought this, which is the Good News Bible with Deuterocanonical Apocryphal books. And it still has the price tag on it. I bought this for $5.50, brand new in like 1987 or something like that. Yes. So and as you can see, it's seen its fair share of beatings. But what I like about it is that it's the Good News Bible, which means that it has all these fun little black and white line drawings in it, which I'm not sure if you can see from there. I hope you can, even ever so slightly. But every page almost has a fun little black and white line drawing on it, and they're all great. And I'm not a tattoo guy, but I've thought to myself that one or two of these would make a fun tattoo to get. Yeah. Where it's like just this very sad person sitting here and having a bad time.
You
Stuff
should
like that
definitely get that on your wrist.
Yeah, why not, right? Why not? But they're fun little things, and they help you to, honestly, if you've had something like this for a while, like a Good News Bible for a while, certain drawings will stick out in your mind. The drawing that sticks out the most in my mind is, I'm going to describe it for you, I'm not looking at it right now, but it's when Moses is getting the Ten Commandments up on Mount Sinai, and it's like a mountain with like a whole bunch of scribbles on the top of it to represent clouds. I'm going to call it up right now to see if I've described it. Yeah. Exodus 13, 15. Oh yeah, there's the Red Sea being parted. 22. Yeah, 20. Look at that. Look at that. There is the mountain.
Oh, are those like all the little peoples?
Yeah.
Oh, fun.
And there's all the scribbles at the bottom, which you probably can't see, but I might insert an image of that at this particular juncture. All right. Now that we've talked about that, let's talk about our readings that we have for this upcoming week. Yeah.
Perfect. I have to look it up again because I've already forgotten. Memory like a sieve. All right, so I believe I will be reading Isaiah chapter 55, verses 6 through 9.
All right, by all means.
Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, that he may have compassion on him. And to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declare the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. I think this is one of the ideas that we as Christians keep going back to over and over again, is the idea that our thoughts are not God's thoughts. We don't have the entire understanding of all eternity that God does, and yet we desire, I suppose, to have God do things the way that we have in mind with our limited knowledge. And I think as Christians we need to, and I think we do, we go back to this thought that, okay, things aren't going how I'm expecting them, but they're going how God is expecting them.
It's a matter of perspective, right? Like, it's a matter of perspective to say, because you don't have the bird's eye view of everything, you can't see everything that's happening at the same time. You can see part of it, the part that you're involved in. You can see that really well, but you can't see the big picture. And so much of what we do is we consume media all the time that is from that bird's eye view, right? Like, you get to see everything that's happening all the time. You're not locked into one character's perspective, their thoughts, their feelings, that kind of thing. You see everything from a pretty broad perspective, and you get to see how the story's going to wrap up and how it affects everything. Whereas in reality, you only really get to see things from your slice. And it's a pretty narrow slice. You don't get to see everything all at the same time. So when people say, how could this possibly be happening to me, that kind of thing, we lack any kind of perspective to see things from the big picture. Like, if you read through the stories in the Old Testament and then try and see things from the perspective of the people who are living in them, not just from your own perspective, because that's one thing, but to, and not just from the perspective of you reading the narrative, but to try and imagine what it would be like to be in those times. Last week's reading that we just had from the Old Testament, where it was Joseph talking about how God was able to work for good something that had been intended for evil. Now, Joseph didn't have the luxury of seeing it at the time while he was down the pit or whatever, being sold into slavery. He didn't get the chance to see it from like a wide perspective at that time. But looking back on it, he had a way better view of it than he would have otherwise. Whereas for us, we're so locked into the present that all we can think about is just like, how could this be happening to me? It's not fair. It's not right, etc., etc. Well,
and for us too, we just the way we live, we're locked in a linear focus, right? Where this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, which isn't necessarily God's view of things. God doesn't necessarily work in a linear fashion as much as he does in the big picture, where, well, this is Amanda's part right here, and, she interacts this way, this way, this way, but not this happens, this happens, this happens, right? And I think that ties in well here with the idea of my thoughts are not your thoughts, where, again, we're locked in, really linear. Yeah. We have this idea of this timeline where God isn't working in that way. He isn't thinking in terms of timeline as much.
The way I explain to the youth group is to say that if you could convert yourself down into pixels and go inside Super Mario Brothers or whatever, and talk to Mario on the inside, you can say, hey Mario, great news. You're locked inside this computer program, but I've come to set you free. And then Mario would say, okay, but then, because Mario would have no clue that he was in a computer program in the first place. And then if you explain to him that he was programmed by somebody, he would say of the person that programmed him, yes, but who programmed him? And that's a great question, right? That's a great question to say, okay, so if I was programmed, then who programmed the programmer? And in reality, nobody did. That's not how that works. You're not programmed. None of us are programmed by programmers. We're born from human parents. So if you're trying to rationalize things through from the perspective only of then who gave birth to God, then who made God, that kind of thing, that's not locked into that's locked into your worldview. That's not saying that his ways can be higher than our ways. You have to allow God to exist outside of time and space. You have to allow him to exist separate from us,
right?
Like independent from, as you say, our timeline, right? Things happen in order. He is able to see the big picture in a way that we for sure can't.
Yeah.
And that's really important to figure out, because if you don't, then you're always going to be thinking of God only in terms of like linear time and cause and effect, and not able to see or encounter anything resembling a bigger picture, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's like, again, like passages like this one are very useful for not explaining things away, but meditating on, right? Like if you are thinking to yourself, this position, this situation that we're in, you don't want to ever just say to somebody, God's ways higher than your ways.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. But to let the mystery exist, to say that there are some things that aren't going to be explained. This passage doesn't exist as an explanation for things, but it certainly exists as a way of holding some kind of mystery and some kind of tension to say that there are things that we don't know yet. And people let that happen with science all the time. Like they're comfortable with saying, well, there's things that science just doesn't know yet.
Yeah.
Not that it won't ever. People always assume that science will figure everything out.
Yeah.
But they will say, science just doesn't know yet what this is. It'll figure that out eventually. Whereas we can say that there are certain things that we don't know yet based on God's plan, and we may know them eventually, but his ways are not our ways, and we may not even know them this side of paradise, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we've seen that being played out, especially now with the coronavirus, right? Where we're learning things new each and every day. And I mean, again, if we're looking at this, I'm sure God has an idea of what's going to be happening next, right? We're not able to, I suppose, consult him and say, hey, God, where are we going to be in December? Like, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
I mean, we can, but I don't know that we would necessarily get anything back from that. But
yeah, you're not wrong. It's tempting, though, isn't it?
It's sure tempting.
It's tempting to say that God should have all these things worked out on our timeline with clear cause and effect things. But even when you have like children who are lacking your same perspective on things, like you've got kids and you say to them, clean your room, brush your teeth, put your stuff away, fold up your laundry, go to school, like that kind of thing. And they're not going to see the reason for it at the time.
No.
They're going to say, well, you gave me green beans and I want ice cream. It's not fair.
Yeah.
But of course, decades later, there's going to be a real difference between if you were just eating ice cream versus if you were eating reasonably healthy things.
Well, and I mean, even on a shorter timeline, I know with my daughter, our big thing is, clean up your toys before you go to bed.
Yep.
And then in the morning, she has not cleaned up her toys, and we have 2 dogs who like to chew on things occasionally, and there will be a toy missing an arm. And you have your cause, you have your effect.
Right.
You have the reason why that ought to have happened.
Yeah.
And I mean, same thing.
It's a matter of perspective. And if we understand this about our own human perspective, to say we don't know everything all the time, but there are certain things we trust in. So the coronavirus, again, great example to bring up, because you may say, based on the numbers that we have here in God's country, Regina, Saskatchewan, you may say, well, it seems like we've got very few cases. Since we have almost no cases. Yeah. Everything's pretty well fine, right? Like no problems at all. Great. So then why we got to do this stuff? You got to do this stuff to keep the cases low. That's how that works. And you can't say, I'll start being careful once the cases start going up. By that point, it's too late.
Right.
The time to be careful is before things get out of hand.
Right. And
you may not, and like explain that to everybody, to say there are reasons for wearing masks or washing your hands or sitting 6 feet apart from somebody, that's important to do whether there are a massive number of cases or not, for good reasons. And you may not be able to see those reasons right then, but you'll never know what you prevented by doing things the right way.
Right.
And that's just, at a certain factor, you have to trust that things are right and good. And fair enough in relation to the scriptures as well. You've got to trust that God is going to do what is good and right, even though it may not seem useful to you at the time.
Yeah.
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 All right. Should we move on?
Yeah, let's move on.
Philippians 1 then, 12 to 14 and 19 to 30. All right. I want you to know, my brothers, that the things that have happened to me have really helped the progress of the gospel. As a result, the whole palace guard and all the others here know that I'm in prison because I am a servant of Christ, and my being in prison has given most of the brothers more confidence in the Lord, so that they grow bolder all the time to preach the message fearlessly. Because I know that by means of your prayers and the help which comes from the Spirit of Jesus Christ, I shall be set free. My deep desire and hope is that I shall never fail in my duty, but that at all times, and especially just now, I shall be full of courage, so that with my whole being I shall bring honor to Christ, whether I live or die. For what is life? To me it is Christ. Death then will bring more. But if by continuing to live I can do more worthwhile work, then I am not sure which I should choose. I am pulled in 2 directions. I want very much to leave this life and be with Christ, which is a far better thing, but for your sake it is much more important that I remain alive. I am sure of this. And so I know that I will stay. I will stay on with you all to add to your progress and join the faith, so that when I am with you again, you will have even more reason to be proud of me in your life in union with Christ Jesus. Now, the important thing is that your way of life should be as the gospel of Christ requires, so that whether or not I am able to go and see you, I will hear that you are standing firm with one common purpose, and that with only one desire you are fighting together for the faith of the gospel. Don't be afraid of your enemies. Always be courageous, and this will prove to them that they will lose and that you will win, because it is God who gives you the victory. For you have been given the privilege of serving Christ, not only by believing in him, but also by suffering for him. Now you can take part with me in the battle. It is the same battle you saw me fighting in the past, and as you hear, the one I am fighting still. I'll bet you have some slightly different wording of those things, Amanda.
Definitely. But actually, I enjoyed hearing the way that yours was laid out, especially actually as it referred to that first part there, because that's one of those parts that I tend to kind of just skim over, right? It's the introduction before you get to the meat of everything. But it's interesting to look at it, and verse 13 especially, it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ.
Yep.
And that's interesting because at that point he is living his entire life for Christ. Everybody is recognizing that what he is doing now, he is doing because of the faith that he has been given. And what an interesting model for us too. That are we prepared to live in that same way that Paul was? Are we willing to say that the way that I'm living is as an example for Christ working through me? That I am maybe not being imprisoned, but I am in the life I am now as a example of who Christ is, what he has done in my life.
Suffering as a way of showing witness. Mm-hmm. Right? Which it's worth mentioning that the word martyr means witness. That's what the original meaning of the word is. And part of what you're called to do as a Christian is to bear with the sufferings that being a follower of Christ entails. Now, you're probably not going to here in Regina, Saskatchewan, God's country, you're probably not going to go to jail like Paul did for repping for Christ, but you are...
Repping for Christ?
Repping for Christ. You heard me. You're not going to go to jail for repping for Christ, but you might get into trouble. You might suffer some kind of either physical or spiritual or financial or social setbacks from doing so. That'll come up. And this notion that the modern world has that suffering is an indicator that you are being that like suffering is something to be avoided as a Christian under any circumstances, right? That you should not be in any way suffering as a servant of Christ is bonkers, because there's nothing scripturally that supports that, like nothing at all. Like you can go back and look through and see how it worked out for everybody in the scriptures who ran up against the world, and they suffer for it. They really do. Mm-hmm. It's very rare to find somebody who's just like, yeah, it worked out fine.
Yeah.
It was great. Everything worked out exactly as it should have, and I got flocks and herds and family and all that stuff that Job gets at the end of the book. But the rest of the book, there's a lot of suffering. He's, scraping his sores with broken pottery.
Absolutely. Well, even... I don't know a ton about the Catholic Church. I know that you're more well-versed than I am. But the saints, they all have to undergo some sort of suffering, don't they, before they come
I don't know. I know that I know the rules are that they have to perform miracles both while they're alive and after they die.
Yeah.
I can't remember if there's some suffering involved, but I wouldn't make it. One wouldn't be surprised.
I mean, I think regardless there is, whether it's a requirement or not.
Yeah.
Again, that goes with the whole... life of a Christian is that we are expected to live out some hardships in our lives.
And Paul's presence as somebody who is imprisoned, that's important too. Mm-hmm. Like that he's giving witness to his captors, right? Like he's not just always going out and doing missionary journeys. He's witnessing wherever he is, whether he's in jail or he's on the road or wherever he happens to be, and being confined is something that is going to lead his captors to Jesus Christ as well, right? That's a real thing that happens. in the scriptures a number of times is that the jailers end up coming to faith in Christ while they're administering to those who have been locked up for the gospel. You don't just get to witness in good times, as long as things are working out for you. You got to witness in bad times too, to those who are like oppressing you, etc.
Well, and I mean, and it's encouraging too to hear Paul talking about this, where he's saying, "My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better." I mean, yeah, it is. You'll hear people who are, on the brink of death who are saying, "I just want to leave. This is not where I want to be. Like, I'm ready to go." And they are, because that is what we're desiring. We're not desiring this life right now. We're living this life right now because we know what the rewards are for others who are going to come in our contact, who are able to hear about what we are doing for Christ.
What I usually tell people, and because I think it's true and I think the scriptures back this up, is that there are people who will say, I'm ready to go home anytime, ready to go and be with God anytime now. I'll say, yeah. I can see why you would want that. I can see why that would be good for you. But while you're still here, you've got some work to do. And you may not think that you do, because you'll be somebody who says, yeah, but I don't see anybody anymore. I don't go anywhere anymore. I don't do anything anymore. I'm like, yeah, but there are still people who are directly around you right now. Those are the people that you are called to witness to, right? And whether they be small in number or large, whether they be just a few people or a lot of people, you have the opportunity to uphold people, to support them, to bear witness to them, that kind of thing. All sorts of things that you can still do as somebody who can't even do that much. Paul may well have said at that point, well, can't go anywhere, can't do anything, call me home, Lord.
Yeah, for sure.
But he says, no, to live is Christ, to die is gain. I'm not sure which is better for me, to go and be with Christ or to be with you now. But he says, I understand that it's necessary for me to still be on earth. It's important for me to still be here and to still do the work that I've been called to do, which is true.
Yeah.
And it was important for him to be there, and it was important for him to do that work, and we're glad that he did it. Yeah. It's very important for us.
Back in the day when we were still doing in-person Bible studies.
Oh, boy.
Oh, I know. Time before time.
Yeah.
There was a lady in my senior's Bible study who said that every time she writes like a card to somebody, like a Christmas card, a birthday card, she tries to include a note of encouragement, especially a Christian note of encouragement. Whether the person is Christian or not, she wants to be able to express some message of hope, basically, where whether they believe or not, she is including a Christian message. She is including a message of hope that they may not realize or have heard anywhere else. And again, it seems like something that's very little to simply say, I'm praying for you, or to say, may Christ be with you, or something like that. But I mean, something that little can encourage a person in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise.
When it's talking in here about building people up in their faith, Paul, this is a point I'm stealing from C.S. Lewis, as I tend to do, but when he's talking about paradise, he's saying, paradise is great. Heaven's great because it's a place where all your problems are solved, right? Like, there's no more tears, the sun will not strike you by day, etc., etc. Everything's fine. But here on earth, this is where you have your chance to use your talents for good, for things that are important, right? Because in paradise, all the problems are solved. You don't have to, there's going to be no chance to be brave or courageous or bold or to do any of those things, to bear witness for Christ, to proclaim his name to an unbelieving world, to preach salvation. All those things will be done. By the time you're in paradise, everybody who is there, it will be literally preaching to the choir of angels, right? Like, you don't have to proclaim any kind of witness at that point. There's no need to do it. So you have that chance to work the work of him while it is day, before the night comes and no one can work, right? You have this wedge of time now to be about God's work, to do things that require bravery or boldness or risk, any of those sorts of things. You can do those now, but you can't do them forever. In paradise, in heaven, you're not going to have that chance because there will be no need. You won't have to proclaim the gospel because everybody will be saved. You won't have to be like work charity because all needs will be met. There will be no need to do that. So all those talents and skills and abilities that you were given to do God's work, this is the time. Like now, don't wait and say, well, when I get to paradise, then I'll do it. Like no, you don't do it then.
Yeah,
like by definition.
Yeah.
Not just you don't have to, you don't get to.
Can't.
No, there's like you're not going to be running a rescue mission within 5 yards of the gates of hell at that point, because all the problems will be resolved. You have the chance to do something now, and Paul's living that out, and he lives that out to the extent that he says, wherever I am, whether I'm in jail or with you or just hanging around or in the Areopagus, wherever I am, I'm doing that work.
Mm-hmm.
All right, very cool.
Yeah.
All right, where are we? Matthew 20, was it?
Let's go. Yeah. So Matthew 20, verses 1 through 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And going about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And to them he said, you go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right, I will give you. So they went. Going out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he did the same. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, why do you stand here idle all day? They said to him, because no one has hired us. He said to them, you go into the vineyard too. And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first. And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now, when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, these last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. But he replied to one of them, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first, and the first last.
That might be my favorite parable. It's close. Mm. It's a race to the finish, but it's a good one. And part of the reason I like it so much is because it's talking about the generosity of God in a way in which he is more generous sometimes than we want him to be. Absolutely. And that's something we got to deal with as Christians, right? You can't hem in the generosity of God and say, wait, hold on. We had to go, we're at church all the time. We're proclaiming salvation. We're tithing faithfully. We are, doing all this volunteer work at the church. We're picking up chairs and moving them around, and reorganizing the sanctuary, all that kind of stuff that may very well be happening at some point in the future. For example,
wait by your phones.
Yeah, right. But these are all things that can and do happen. And it's no good for us to say, but wait a minute, other people can get into heaven that didn't do this stuff? Yes, obviously they can. Yeah. But you've got to reframe your thinking. You've got to reframe your thinking into thinking, are you doing these things so you can get into heaven? If yes, then you might as well do that thing that people do where they say, well, I'll just have a deathbed confession and I'll get into heaven. Yeah, if you want to do that, yeah. But you know who you're ripping off is you. Yeah. That's who you're ripping off, because what the guys who were doing the work out there in the vineyard all day, bearing the heat of the day and the blah, 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 what they perhaps didn't work out or didn't figure out is that was good to do. The work they were doing was work that was good to do. And that's a hard thing to get through our minds. Mm-hmm. Because especially today, people want to get something for nothing. Or as
they are.
Right. Yeah, well, yeah. Mm-hmm. But they want to get the most payment for the least work.
Right.
That's where you want to go with it. So if you're trying to work out this as an economic decision, you're saying, well, why would I bother going to work and schlepping around boxes all day when I could just go on the CERB or whatever. And not that people are in general going to think about that, but really, if you are making right now less than you would on the CERB, you might think to yourself, hey, going on the CERB sounds great. Which it does, until you realize that part of what you're called to do is to do the work. And the work itself is good and God-pleasing.
Mm-hmm. But it's also hard.
It's hard.
Like this parable fits so well with the epistle reading, which I'm glad wasn't just the 2 verses that I thought it was.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Because when Paul says, "For me to live is Christ," like that's including all of the blessings you receive from Christ in this life here.
Yeah.
It's not just the end goal, but it's the entire process up to that point where you can see the way that God works through the world. You can see Christ being magnified in the people you come in contact with, in the situations you are a part of, even when they aren't necessarily good situations or good people. You can still, again, look back with that hindsight sometimes to see the way that God is working through these situations and the way that living a flawed life is still to live as Christ, because you're receiving the blessings from Christ even now in this life.
And the work is part of the reward. Like you got to figure that out too. If you are always just looking at this as an economic decision, as in the less I do, the better it is. Again, Paul doesn't say that, right? Paul doesn't say, "Where are the cops when we need them?" Paul doesn't say, "For me to live is for me to die is gain. So I'm going to go die now." He understands he has work to do, and the work itself is good work to do. If you have a position that requires work, and I'm not just talking about paid positions either. If you are a student, then studying and working hard at your classes is good. Like, you will get more out of it if you work harder. If you are raising children, you will get more out of it if you work harder. If you have a job where you go to work every day, yeah, you can slack off and do nothing. Like, you can just shuffle papers around and stare out the window. But then who are you ripping off? Like, yes, your employer partially, but also you.
Because you don't get that same satisfaction.
Well, you're taking human capital and wasting it.
Yeah.
You are taking your time and just throwing it away. For what purpose, right? But if you are choosing to view things only as, I want to get as much as possible for the least amount, then you will view the work as an imposition. But the work was given to people to do before the fall into sin. God doesn't give us work as a punishment. Like, he links, not he links, but like work is now linked to sustenance as a punishment. But the work itself is not a punishment. You are built with a desire to do things, to not always be slacking off all the time. And the people that are about the work in the vineyard all day, your problem is if you say, but I just wanted to get paid, and if I knew I was going to get the same wage as the guys who showed up at the last second, I wouldn't have bothered showing up at the beginning of the day. And it's the same argument that you hear with people who say, I want to get into heaven, therefore I'm just going to have that deathbed confession. But that's not why you're doing things. You're not going to church and preaching the gospel and reading the scriptures and studying the Bible just to get into heaven. Like, you can do that without any of those things. You can be a baptized baby that dies 5 seconds after your christening and still goes to heaven. Fine. But that's not the point. The point is not, can I go to heaven? The point is, can you spend a lifetime of doing good, worthwhile, charitable, hard, but rewarding work in Christ's vineyard? And yeah, you can. And the work that he's given you to do is good work. It's excellent work. It's good work to do that you will find rewarding if you are about your Father's business, right? Yeah. And yes, he does conclude by saying, don't be angry because I'm generous. Which we as Christians would do well to remember that passage. Yeah. Anything further on that most excellent parable? I feel like I should be saying more, but I don't know what else to say.
I mean, like, I feel like it tied so well into the epistle that we've said what we would have said about this when we were talking about the epistle already.
Right. And these are things that Paul would know. Like, these are the sorts of things
for sure.
that sustain you in your
sure.
Christian life, to know that you are about the work of Christ because the work of Christ is worth doing. Like, you are there to do the work of him who has sent you out there into the vineyard. because that work's good to do. And if you're just worried about getting paid, then yeah, just try and show up at the last second. Fine.
Yeah.
But it's not about getting paid. And hopefully at a certain point in your career, you realize that you're not just going to work for the sole purpose of getting paid. Because if that's the case, then you are basically in a jail cell of your own making.
Right.
Yeah, because you're there for 40 hours a week. You spend more time at your work probably than you do at home, awake, anyway. So what's the purpose?
Yeah.
Whereas if you know that the work to do is good work, and it doesn't matter what it is, right? If you are able to find value in serving your community and serving the people that are there, in doing work that is pleasing and worthwhile to do, if you are finding some kind of value in that, then the pay that you are getting is fine, but it's not the only reason for doing what you're doing, that there are other reasons. If you're just going to church to get into heaven, you're kind of ripping yourself off.
Right.
But if you are about the work of God, and people have found this, that if you take the time to become more invested in God's word, like to really think on it, reflect on it, to mold yourself to it, you're going to find yourself having a way better time than you would otherwise, because you're not looking at it as a thing you have to do just to get the payment of paradise. You're looking at it as a thing that you want to do, and paradise is thrown in there into the bargain. I know it's a cliche to say, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, which is not true. I love this job, don't get me wrong, but it's hard.
Yeah.
Hey, those of you who are listening at home, it's not just podcasting all the time. It's not just I don't just work an hour a week either. Some stuff that you do is incredibly hard.
Yeah.
So you do have to work, but the work's good work. You end your day better if you feel like you've done something, as opposed to if you just just showed up and stared at a screen for 8 hours and then went home.
Yeah, totally.
And then stared at another screen, right? For example. Yeah, whoopsie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I found that too, like, again, especially with COVID, for a lot of time I was working at home, and anybody who's been working at home with young children, you'll realize how little work really gets done, or how different, I suppose, the work is that's done. Being able to be back here has actually had a lot more meaning for it, because it's not just a given that I would go into work, but it's now almost a privilege to be able to go into work.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. And you realize that the work that you were doing was a way of finding a lot of satisfaction.
Yeah.
Because and I talk about this all the time too, we're like dogs in that we're built to work. Like, we are built to do things. We're not built for idleness. Like, we're not built to just be barnacles that just wait for food to fly by you and just grab it and suck it into your mouth or whatever. We're built to do things. And we are at our best when we're doing things. We are at our best when we're about the work God has given us to do. Then we're satisfied in a way that we're, like, in our modern lives right now, we're, like, agitated, we're jittery, we're perplexed, we're concerned, we're unhappy, we're disturbed. In the same way as, like, your German Shepherd is when you just put it in a crate for 12 hours a day and just tell it not to move. That German Shepherd wants to, like, go herd sheep. That's what it wants to do. It's desperate for it.
Or Germans.
It wants to herd Germans around and take them to the Steinhoist, right? Like, that's what your dog wants to do. And most dogs, almost all dogs, are built to work, to do something. That's why we have them. Yeah. If you want a dog that doesn't make a lot of noise and doesn't want to do work, get a cat. That's what they do. They're just there.
But even cats do have purpose too.
Yeah, they do, but they're perfectly content to just lie around and
there,
sleep and get pats on the head, right? But dogs want to work, and like, we frequently chastise the dog for wanting to work. The dog's jumping up and is jittery and upset and agitated because it wants to do things.
Yeah.
And we have built them to do that. We have told them, hey, your whole life's purpose is to want to find sheep and round them up, and I'm not going to let you do that. And the dog's going to get agitated in the same way that modern human beings, we're suffering from this incredible malaise of it, like we're being in a crate all day because we're not doing the work that we're supposed to do. We're not working either in the world with anything important or in the kingdom of God for anything important either. We're just jittery all the time because we've got all this pent-up desire to work that's built into us by God, and we're not allowing ourselves to do it.
Right.
And it's a real shame. It's a big waste of human capital. But the whole idea of being a vocational Christian, and Martin Luther talks a lot about this, is to say that you can serve God in your vocation by understanding that the work that you are doing is good and God-pleasing work. He says that like a Christian shoemaker is not one who sews little crosses onto shoes, but instead one who makes good shoes.
Right.
That you do the thing that you are there to do to the best of your ability to do it. And because God has given you work to do, and the work, if you can find value in that work, then the payment you receive is great, but it's not the only reason you're doing it. Because if that is, you'll never be satisfied. It'll never be enough money.
Well, and it's interesting, too, when you look at the idea of vocation, and then you look back to Paul, who found his vocation as a prisoner, right? Like, it's something to say that even the least of all vocations, it would see, not vocations, but the least of all occupations, let's say, can have a positive vocation. You can still serve God no matter how lowly your position is.
Right, because like if you are incarcerated, in which I don't know how you're getting this video, but if you are incarcerated, you can work on being the best prisoner you can be.
Absolutely.
Like you can work on rehabilitating yourself, learning skills, working in the in whatever shops or whatever they have available to you to work at, the kitchen, whatever it is. You can work on being the best of that you can possibly be, even in that kind of circumstance. You don't have to say, well, I'll just wait until I get out and then I'll be useful.
Right.
You can be useful where you are. Whether it's a big space or a small space, whether it be with a lot of people or very, very few, you can grow where you're planted. And actually get some stuff done in that environment. Even if you don't think even if it's too small, and you think it's too small, it's never too small. You can still be useful there.
Something about faith like a mustard seed,
right? Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Cool. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, there's gonna be no surprises when I'm gonna be preaching on this Sunday because I love this parable a lot, and I find that it's very useful but like all these readings are very useful to just sit and let them be what they are, to not use them as an explanation or an excuse, but to let them exist and say, God's ways aren't our ways. He is going to not only recompense us, but also let the work itself be the recompense. He's going to because when you're out doing the work of God, you're doing it for two people. You are serving your neighbor, but you are also being served through the work.
Which is why he says to love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And you are improved by it. It's not like only your neighbor gets the benefit from that and you get nothing. And the thing that you get is not heaven for being such a good person. No. But like if you are somebody who has done charitable work for somebody, whether small or big, you will know that you feel way more satisfied doing that than you do opening up your 15th browser window and they're all on Netflix, right? Like that's fine for a while, but you certainly feel as though you've accomplished more by doing what God has designed you to do for your neighbor than just serving yourself with chips and dip, right?
I could go for some chips and dip.
I could too. So let's wrap up.
Okay.
All right. I'll say a word of prayer and then we'll disperse. Gracious Lord, you remind us in your word that your ways are not our ways. And we ask for your help in working through that in the world that we're living in, a world that seems to be flipped upside down sometimes, where things are not the way we would want them to go, where things are not going the way we'd like them to do. But you remind us that we are here to work your work while it is still day, to be about the work that you've given us to do and to allow us to be part of the work in your kingdom. Thank you for giving us that opportunity to let us be bold and courageous and strong and brave while we still can, to do things that are charitable while we are still able to do so. And whether we be in a small environment or a very, very big one, to allow us to be part of the work in your kingdom, whichever slice of it we happen to be in. We ask for these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us on the second vodcast.
Vodcast?
That's what they call them.
I thought they were vlogs. Is it different?
Yeah. I think a vlog is like a video blog, and a vodcast is a video podcast.
Interesting.
Yeah, or it could be wrong. Who knows? I usually am. Thanks for joining us either way. Look forward to seeing you guys sometime soon.